There is a cruel paradox at the center of modern financial life that becomes obvious only once you look past surface prices. Because being broke does not merely mean having less money to spend. It often means paying more for the same necessities, more for the same mistakes, more for the same delays, and more for the same uncertainty. Poverty is usually imagined as a shortage, a simple condition in which someone cannot access enough income or enough resources. But that framing is incomplete because it suggests a passive lack when the lived reality is often an active penalty. To be financially strained is not only to buy less, it is to enter a world where the structure of daily life becomes more expensive, less efficient, and less forgiving. The person with fewer reserves is not merely excluded from comfort, they are regularly charged extra for instability. This begins with time. People often talk about money as if it were the central scarce resource. But in financially fragile households, time becomes equally important because the ability to wait is a major economic advantage. If you can wait, you can compare prices, buy in bulk, postpone a non-essential purchase until a better option appears, travel farther for better value, negotiate slowly, and absorb short-term inconvenience for long-term savings. But if you cannot wait because the bill is due now, the fridge is empty now, the bus card needs topping up now, or the car repair must happen today, or your job is at risk tomorrow, then cheap options begin to disappear. Urgency raises the price of ordinary life. In that sense, being broke is expensive because it compresses decision time, and compressed decision time almost always favors worse economics. This is one reason the poor often pay more for basics while appearing to buy less. A person with cash reserves can buy the large pack, the seasonal discount, the durable version, the prepaid plan, or the item that costs more upfront but less over time. A person living close to zero slack often cannot. They buy in smaller quantities, in more expensive formats, with worse timing, and under less favorable conditions. The unit price is higher, even when the total purchase is smaller. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in financial life, because from the outside, it can look irrational. Why buy the smaller package if it costs more per unit? Why not choose the better long-term option? Why not pay once and avoid recurring charges? The answer is often simple. The cheaper option over time requires money now, and money now is exactly what scarcity removes. The same pattern applies far beyond groceries or household goods. Transportation is a classic example. A person with stable finances may own a reliable vehicle, maintain it on schedule, replace parts before failure, and prevent more expensive breakdowns later. A financially strained person may delay maintenance, not because they do not understand the risk, but because the immediate cost competes with rent, food, or utilities. That delay often turns a manageable repair into a larger repair. The result is that the poorer person pays more, not because the first decision was irrational in a vacuum, but because short-term survival forced a choice that made long-term cost worse. The broken system then punishes the forced compromise as if it were personal negligence. Housing works the same way, though in quieter and more structural ways. People with stronger finances can often access neighborhoods with lower hidden costs, better insulation, better infrastructure, more predictable utilities, safer environments, and fewer logistical frictions. People with weaker finances often end up paying through instability rather than through sticker price alone. Rent may appear lower on paper, but the total life cost can be higher once transportation, safety trade-offs, poor maintenance, utility inefficiency, and constant moving risks are included. The visible monthly price is not always the full economic price. Scarcity tends to push people toward options that look affordable up front and become costly through all the things the price does not include. Then there is the issue of fees, which are among the most direct ways poverty becomes monetized. Late fees, overdraft fees, penalty interest, reconnection fees, minimum balance penalties, and emergency borrowing costs are rarely large enough individually to seem like the central problem. But that is exactly what makes them so effective. They attach themselves to weakness quietly. A person with margin may never encounter them or may brush them off occasionally. A person without margin can be hit repeatedly because one fee reduces the balance available for the next obligation, and the next obligation may create another fee. The household is not merely short on money. It is caught in an environment where small disruptions are turned into revenue for someone else. That is why being broke feels expensive in a way that is hard to describe. You are not only living with fewer options, you are living in a system that keeps adding charges whenever your options narrow further. Credit deepens this pattern because it offers immediate relief, while often extending long-term burden. For someone with reserves, credit can be a convenience tool, a temporary bridge, or a logistical aid. For someone without reserves, it becomes a survival mechanism. And survival borrowing is priced differently in practice, even when the formal product looks the same. The person using credit to smooth ordinary life is often carrying balances longer, paying higher effective cost, and making choices under pressure rather than strategy. Interest, in this context, is not just the price of borrowing. It is often the price of having no room to delay the problem. The less flexibility you have, the more expensive flexibility becomes. This is also why subscription traps and installment models can hit poorer households differently than wealthier ones. On the surface, small recurring payments feel easier than one large upfront cost, and in some cases, that is rational. But recurring models often extract more total money over time, especially when cancellation is forgotten, pricing is opaque, or the product is being used as a substitute for true ownership or resilience. Scarcity makes recurring cost psychologically attractive because it lowers the immediate barrier. Yet lowering the immediate barrier often raises the long-term price. This is one of the core mechanisms through which being broke becomes expensive. The cheap-feeling option is frequently the expensive option once time is allowed to do its work. There is a deeper psychological cost here as well, because poverty changes not only what people can buy, but how they are forced to think. A person under constant financial pressure becomes more local in decision-making. The next few days matter more than the next few months. Immediate continuity matters more than elegant optimization. Emotional relief matters more than theoretical efficiency. These are not signs of poor intelligence. They are predictable responses to instability. Behavioral economics has shown again and again that scarcity narrows attention. It pulls focus toward urgent deficits and away from broader planning. When someone is broke, they are often making decisions in a cognitively taxed environment. That alone raises the probability of paying more. Mistakes increase when bandwidth falls, and the financially stressed are often asked to perform the most precise optimization with the least room for error. This is one reason moralizing advice about money so often misses the point. Suggestions like, just save more, just buy quality once, just avoid fees, just plan ahead, or just think long-term can contain some truth, but they frequently ignore the fact that planning ahead itself requires usable margin. To avoid fees, you often need buffer. To buy quality once, you often need upfront cash. To think long-term, you often need the present to stop shouting. The broke person is not merely facing worse choices. They are often facing choices designed by the absence of time, reserves, and mental bandwidth. The system then judges those choices by outcomes while ignoring the conditions under which they were made. Historically, this has been true in many different forms. In agricultural societies, people without reserves were forced to sell labor or goods at the worst possible times because they could not wait for better terms. In early industrial economies, low-income households paid more for basic survival because they lacked storage, mobility, and bargaining power. In modern cities, the same pattern appears through transportation burdens, emergency borrowing, inefficient housing, predatory fee structures, and the inability to make large upfront purchases that lower long-term costs. The mechanism changes with the era, but the principle stays consistent. Scarcity reduces optionality, and reduced optionality raises price. The concept of optionality is crucial here. Wealth is often thought of as ownership, but much of its practical power is actually the ability to choose timing. The ability to wait a week, a month, or a season changes prices dramatically. The wealthy are not only buying better things, they are often buying under better conditions. They can reject bad offers, absorb inconvenience, and avoid urgency. They can let the market come to them. The broke person often cannot. They must solve today inside today. That requirement forces them into transactions where the seller, lender, landlord, or system holds most of the leverage. When one side must act now and the other side can wait, the price is rarely fair. There is also a durability gap that makes poverty more expensive. Better-off households are more likely to buy goods, services, or arrangements that last longer and fail less often. Poorer households are more likely to buy what can be reached today, even if it wears out faster or performs worse. Over time, this means replacing instead of retaining, repairing more often, and paying repeatedly for lower quality outcomes. The expensive part of poverty is not always that poor people buy luxury. It is often that they are trapped in lower durability cycles, where money exits the household repeatedly without creating much stability. Health too becomes more expensive under scarcity. Not only because care costs money, but because preventive action requires time, planning, transportation, flexibility, and a willingness to spend now in order to avoid something worse later. Financially stressed households often delay care, defer tests, postpone rest, and absorb symptoms until a problem becomes acute. Acute solutions tend to be more expensive than preventive ones. The result is another version of the same pattern. Broke households are often forced into choices that maximize immediate survivability at the expense of long-term efficiency, then blamed when long-term costs rise. The same logic applies to work. A person with reserves can search longer, negotiate harder, retrain, relocate, or tolerate a transition period. A person without reserves may accept a job faster, commute farther, endure worse conditions, or stay in unstable arrangements because they cannot absorb even a temporary gap. That means lower income can produce not just less money, but a worse bargaining position. And a worse bargaining position creates future costs that are hard to measure directly. The price of being broke includes not only higher bills, but weaker leverage in almost every market that matters. Once you see this clearly, you begin to understand why escaping poverty is not only about earning more. It is about breaking the chain through which scarcity keeps charging a premium. A household needs enough margin that urgency stops setting prices. Enough reserve that once a prize does not create three more. Enough flexibility that the cheapest option over time becomes reachable in the present. This is why small buffers matter so much. They do not simply add comfort, they interrupt expensive patterns. They allow bulk over drip, maintenance over breakdown, planning over reaction, prevention over emergency, and negotiation over surrender. Even a modest increase in financial slack can reduce the premium attached to everyday life. This also changes the meaning of savings. Savings are often framed as delayed gratification or future security, which is true, but in the context of scarcity, they are also anti-penalty devices. They reduce the urgency tax. They lower exposure to bad timing. They create bargaining power where before there was only compliance. They make it possible to choose the cheaper, long-term option rather than the merely reachable, short-term one. That is why the first meaningful financial buffer can have an impact larger than its size suggests. It changes what kinds of transactions a person is forced into, and that changes the economics of daily life. Still, none of this should be romanticized as a simple matter of discipline. Structural inequality, wage instability, housing costs, health burdens, and geographic constraints shape these outcomes powerfully. The point is not to reduce poverty to budgeting errors. It is to understand that being broke is expensive because low-margin living changes the price structure of ordinary existence. The poor are not just paying the same prices with less money. They are often paying different prices entirely, though those price differences are hidden inside timing, financing, deterioration, leverage, and stress. In the end, the phrase, "why being broke is so expensive," is really a question about systems. It asks why ordinary life becomes premium priced when reserves are absent, why urgency costs more than patience, why lack of flexibility causes hidden fees to emerge everywhere, why the person with the fewest resources is so often asked to make the costliest version of the same basic decision. The answer is not that poverty creates bad character. It is that scarcity strips away the conditions under which good economics usually happen. Once waiting becomes impossible, buying cheaply becomes difficult. Once buffer disappears, mistakes become billable. Once stress dominates attention, efficient planning collapses. That is why financial progress often feels non-linear. The first meaningful slack is not just extra money, it is reduced punishment. It is the moment when the world stops charging quite so much for every delay, every small mistake, every urgent need, every inability to buy up front, and every decision made under pressure. Real stability begins there, not when life becomes luxurious, but when basic living stops carrying a premium simply because you are poor.